Regrettably, I'm about to cause trouble. Written and narrated by Amie McNee. Chapter 19. Rufus was sitting by the fire, warming his toes with the flames. He turned to us all as we entered. "What happened?" he asked, sensing the tension that had walked into the room. "I will tell you what happened." I sat down next to him. I wanted to hold court. Zita had been treating me like shit this whole time, hiding things from me. This was her mistake, her deviousness. I sat in the chair next to Rufus, pulled off my shoes, and placed my feet next to his. "Zita is my fap-sucking aunt." Rufus didn't look surprised. "Did you know?" I hit him in the shoulder. He shrugged. "The Fae folk know everything," Zita said. I turned to her with a flounce. "Don't talk to me about the godforsaken fairy folk. Explain yourself." She sat herself on the kitchen table. It was a very un-Zita thing to do. She moved the glass jars of dried fruit and made space for Hildy, who hopped up also. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I've been asking her the same question since you first arrived," Hildy said. "Don't try and get on my side," I snapped at her. "I didn't want you to know," Zita explained. "I like who I am now. It took me so long to detach myself from them. I don't like anyone knowing." "Why not?" "Because I do not like my family, and they do not like me. It was volatile. I was thrown out. Surely you can understand, Maude. You don't go around telling people where you came from." "But your family is my family." "Neither of us has a family." I felt infuriated. She was being so obtuse. "Did you know who I was when I first came to the apothecary?" She flushed. "They may not be my family, but I've kept an eye on them. You only live down the road." "How did you end up here, in an apothecary? Is it because thou art a witch?" "Did she have a mark? Did she know about my own mark?" "Our story is a long one." She took Hildy's hand. "I am owed it." "Tell her, Zita," Hildy whispered. "Why?" she signed angrily. "She's your kin." "I don't have any kin." "Why don't you tell her how we met?" Hildy suggested. "She won't like it." "Just tell me." "I've been working at this apothecary since I was a girl," Hildy started. I swiveled to look at her. "It was my mother's practice before it was mine, and it was my grandmother's before it was my mother's." "Did you visit her for remedies?" I asked Zita, wanting her to take over the story. "Of course not. Your mother's family. Your family. Your family," I corrected. She cringed. "They only used the family physician, but on one particular occasion, we could not." "You were with child," I guessed. She gave a thin smile. "No, Maude. Your mother was with child." "What?" I demanded. "When was this? When she was pregnant with John?" I knew she had had a difficult pregnancy with my eldest brother. "She would have been but 15. "What?" I was struggling to understand. "Don't be obtuse, Maude." She wiped down her skirts. "Your mother wouldn't tell me who the babe's father was, but she had told me, in perhaps our first moment of true sisterly connection, that she wanted to be rid of it, and so I took her to the witches. We told our parents we were going for a long walk, and we came straight here." "But it was not my father's baby." "To my knowledge, she had not met your father yet, no." Two thoughts were at the forefront of my mind. The first was an angry tangle of words that went, "Good God, my mother? A hypocrite, pretender, liar." A more coherent thought lingered too. Holy shit, my mother could conceive a baby by glancing at a codpiece. But she hadn't just sneaked a peek, she'd lain with someone outside her marriage. I felt a hand on my knee. I turned to Rufus. "Art thou well, Maude?" he asked. "Perfectly," I nodded. "Continue." "Hildy and Hildy's mother took great care of Mary. They sat with her for some time after she had taken the right herbs, explained everything that would or could happen." "Was she upset?" "She was brave," Hildy said. "Hildy looked after your mother gently and kindly. It was, of course, the first time I had met a wise woman, one of my kind. I did not feel any call to the practice immediately. I was a Montague, promised to some lord's boy, whose name I can't recall." "You can't remember the name of your betrothed?" "Soon you will forget the name of yours." "I will never forget." "You will," Zita said firmly. My connection to Hildy was immediate, despite the circumstances. I remember catching her eye as I waited by my sister's side. I remember the butterflies in my stomach, and how I tried to play them off as nerves for Mary. Did my mother recover? I mean, of course she did, but I had to ask. She did. She experienced discomfort, but she was back to her usual self in no time. I, on the other hand, found excuses to return to the shop. I had remained obsessed with the apothecary girl since I left. I did not know what to do with the feelings. I had never heard of such a thing. I wondered if I simply really wanted to be her friend, and I wondered if perhaps she had cast a spell on me. No one says I haven't, Hildy said, smiling. I began sneaking into town. Hildy's mother taught me about the stars, about the practice. Over time, I became one of them. Zita stopped, a tone of finality in her voice. What happened then? You were expelled from your family. Obviously. After only a few weeks of Zita's visits, we weren't just exchanging stories about remedies and planetary placements. We were sharing our lives with one another, Hildy explained. When I got sick, Zita stopped going home altogether. She stayed by my side. Hildy nudged Zita gently, asking her to continue. My parents thought I had been abducted, taken away by some vagabond. But Mary knew where I was. I was by Hildy's sickbed. She swallowed. We thought she had the sweating sickness. We did everything we could to break the fevers. I thought she was going to die. She would drift in and out of consciousness, hardly seeing or hearing me. I looked at Hildy, who seemed much less bothered by the story of her near demise than Zita, perhaps because she couldn't hear it. Mary came to confront me on the day Hildy's fever broke. She had awoken, but her hearing had gone. I waved at Hildy, needing her attention to my lips. The fever took your hearing, I confirmed. It was like I'd been offered to the gods, but they'd only taken part of me. I sometimes hear a glimmer of sound, and I wonder if it is noise from the heavens, my hearing having been taken to the skies, but the rest of me left on earth. She rested her cheek on Zita's shoulder. Your mother asked me to come back. She told me I was bringing shame to her name. I told her I wouldn't. So she called the steward on us, Zita said. I felt a rush of anger at my mother. Venerator of rules, she'd broken herself. For what? Devil worship or something? I asked. Nay. They were both silent. I'm going to bed, Zita announced abruptly. You owe me this story, I protested. Her bright blue eyes glistened. Please, Zita. I gave you shelter, teaching, food, whilst you paraded around my home in my sister's jewels. I owe you nothing. She marched up the stairs. I looked to Hildy, and without me asking, she continued the story. My mother passed not long after I awoke. A similar fever came upon her, but the gods took all of her, not just her hearing. And that sealed our fate. Zita wouldn't leave me. I told her to return home, but Hildy shrugged. Then your mother visited again, for the final time. I was still draining eel fat from my ears when I saw them both. I remember I had my head on the side, gazing blankly out the window as Zita tried to coax the fat out of my ear cavity. That's why I saw them first. I recognized Mary, of course, but I also knew the man next to her. He was a justice of the peace. His name was John Crawley, and he was a notorious pest. He was practically drooling as he stood outside the apothecary. I remember being nervous, not just because we had a justice in our home, but because I wasn't going to be able to hear anything. I remember watching his lips moving, trying to understand what he was saying. I could only assume, just as you had, Maude, that he was accusing us of malfeasant witchcraft. But that wasn't why he was there. I remember watching Zita try to explain what had happened to me. It would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. The miming, the looks, the moment Zita got the actual eel out and began flinging it around. I remember just standing there, the centre of this sad story. But they were not here to accuse us of malfeasance. I felt Rufus stir next to me. He went and sat where Zita had been. He held Hildy's hand gently, and she smiled at him and stroked his cheek. I hardly knew I was in love, Hildy continued. So in a way, I'm grateful for Mary and her accusations. They were prophetic. We had been summoned to face charges. We were accused of something not even written in the law, of something so foul we were tried in secret. She laughed softly to herself. After the steward and your mother had left, Zita explained what Mary had accused us of by writing it down on a wax tablet. Your mother had lied, told a story to get us in trouble. I remember the words Zita wrote. We are accused of vice with one another. Of course, I replied that we hadn't committed any such sin, because we hadn't. So she kept writing. I remember her blue eyes flickering from my eyes to the wax. She was so hesitant to write it. It read, "She claims she saw us in the fields." Of course, I had been in bed for weeks, but your dear mother was determined. She wanted to make up naughty stories about us, and I swear the smell of wax tablets still sends shivers up my legs to this day. I asked Zita what we were supposed to have been doing in these fields. She wrote, "We were unclothed." And then she wrote, "We were kissing." Of course, she had to write it on a palette. It would have been unwise to make it permanent on parchment, but sometimes I wish she had written it with ink so I could read it every day. I wish she had tattooed it into my skin so it was a part of me. Instead, a few moments after she had handed me that tablet, she kissed the words into my lips. Something moved at the top of the stairs. Zita was sitting on the landing, head leaning on the railing, listening. The fire crackled, filling up the silence. "What happened after that?" Rufus asked. "After the kissing?" asked Hildy cheekily. "He means with the accusations," I said quickly. "Don't you?" "Not necessarily," he shrugged. Rufus was a scoundrel. People don't like to deal with our special sort of sinning. It turns out that when you're a woman who loves a woman, you don't get burnt or imprisoned or anything so novel. You get forgotten. "Nay, nay," said Zita from the top of the stairs. "Not forgotten. You get eradicated. Even our trial wasn't recorded. People don't want to think about it. They don't want to talk about it. The courts had physicians inspect us. They pried open our legs to make sure neither of us had a hidden member somewhere between our thighs. They looked thoroughly, very much wanting to find even a hint of a prick. But once it was decided that neither of us did, they demanded that the court records be destroyed. They didn't want our story getting out." "Why?" I signed. "Women run hot, Maude. If the ladyfolk in town realised they could find pleasure with their own kind," she trailed off for a moment. "I think they honestly believe that all women might be put off men entirely." I managed to laugh. "How absurd!" "The male mind is frail, Maude. Do you know in the church records Zita shares my own last name? Zita Gold." "They let you marry?" "Nay, we are sisters in the eye of the Lord," she said, a tiny smile on her face. "It makes them all feel a lot better. That is why we live together. That is why we love each other. That is why we sleep next to one another. Sisters." "You didn't worry about incest being added to your charges?" I asked. "Never bothered us," said Zita.